Emily Carter had never been the type to settle for ordinary. While her classmates were filling out college applications and planning parties, she spent her evenings staring at recruitment posters in her small-town library. Bold letters shouted, "Promises of challenge and honor, forged by the sea. Honor, courage, commitment." Those words lit a fire inside her. She didn't want to fade into the background of her hometown. She wanted a life that mattered, something that would test the edges of who she was. The Navy felt like her chance to step into a story bigger than herself. Her parents were skeptical, though they hid it behind supportive smiles. Her father, a mechanic, worried his daughter was chasing a dream that would break her down. Her mother cried the night Emily announced her decision, asking softly, "Why not wait a little? Why not try college first?" But Emily's mind was made up. She wasn't running away from home, she was running toward purpose. The day she signed the enlistment papers, her hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of commitment. She would no longer just be Emily from Jackson, Mississippi. She was about to become something new, a recruit in the United States Navy. Boot camp hit her like a storm. From the moment she stepped off the bus, instructors barked orders and voices, sharp enough to cut steel. She was thrown into a world where hesitation meant punishment, where every mistake cost not just her, but her entire division. Emily was small compared to some of the others, her frame wiry rather than muscular, and the instructors noticed. One sneered at her during a push-up drill. "Recruit Carter, you call that effort? My grandmother has more muscle than you." The other recruits laughed, and Emily felt her face burn. But humiliation became fuel. She gritted her teeth and pushed harder. When her arms gave out, she pushed through the pain until her elbows shook violently under her weight. At night, her body ached so badly, she sometimes cried quietly into her pillow. Yet, every morning, she rose with the others, pulled her uniform tight, and ran until her lungs burned. She quickly learned that survival in training wasn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It was about refusing to quit when quitting seemed easy. Many recruits rang the bell signaling they were done. Emily never did. She carried sandbags, crawled through mud, and endured shouted insults, all while whispering to herself, "Don't stop. Prove them wrong." Her peers began to notice. The same recruits who laughed at her during push-ups started respecting her grit. She wasn't the loudest nor the flashiest, but she was dependable. When others stumbled on long runs, she slowed to encourage them. When someone wanted to give up, she whispered that they were stronger than they thought. Slowly, the division began to look at her not as the weakest link, but as the quiet backbone who wouldn't let anyone fall behind. Still, doubts lingered in her own mind. Late at night, lying in her bunk, Emily often questioned herself. Was she really cut out for this? Could she ever match the strength of those who seemed born for the uniform? But then she remembered the reason she came, to prove, most of all to herself, that she belonged. Weeks stretched into months. Each trial hardened her. Each setback taught her resilience. She learned to shoot, to march, to follow orders without hesitation. She learned the weight of discipline and the cost of mistakes. She learned that fear wasn't an enemy, but a companion. To be carried and conquered. By the time graduation loomed, Emily stood straighter, her shoulders broader, her gaze sharper. She was no longer the timid girl who had walked into the recruiter's office with shaking hands. She hadn't fully become a sailor yet, but something inside her had shifted. She was tempered, like steel in a fire, stronger than before, but still waiting for the true test that would define her. What Emily didn't know was that her trial wouldn't come years later, after careful preparation. It would come sooner than she could have imagined. In the heat of chaos, when her title as just a recruit would be torn away forever, Emily quickly discovered that Boot camp was designed to strip away the individual and rebuild something stronger in its place. Every day began before dawn with the blaring of whistles and the echo of shouted commands. Recruits leapt from their bunks in a frenzy, scrambling to dress, form ranks, and sprint to the parade ground. There was no such thing as easing into the day. Chaos was the norm, and hesitation meant punishment for everyone. Emily was always a step behind in those first weeks. Her boots felt too heavy, her body too slow. She fumbled through inspections, drawing the sharp eye of her instructors. Petty Officer Harkins, a man whose voice could rattle glass, seemed to single her out. "Carter, is that your salute, or are you swatting flies?" he barked one morning. The others chuckled, but Emily refused to let the sting of embarrassment linger. Instead, she practiced her salute in secret every night until her arm snapped. Up with crisp precision, the physical trials were relentless. Endless push-ups in the dirt, runs that stretched for miles under the punishing sun, and obstacle courses designed to break the spirit as much as the body. Some recruits thrived, muscles bulging as if made for this life. Emily was wiry and lean, and it showed. She often finished at the back of the pack, her chest heaving, her legs trembling. But where others groaned or gave up, she gritted her teeth and pressed forward. Every bead of sweat felt like a small victory. The hardest part wasn't always physical. It was the mental warfare. Instructors shouted at them not to sow cruelty, but to strip away comfort, to reveal who could endure pressure when it mattered most. Sleep was a luxury, privacy non-existent. Emily's weaknesses were exposed daily, and each time she felt the temptation to crumble. Yet, she remembered her father's words before she left. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about not letting fear stop you. Her division began to notice her quiet persistence. During a particularly grueling drill, one recruit collapsed beside her. His body refused to cooperate, and the instructors barked at him to get up. Emily didn't hesitate. She dropped beside him, whispered encouragement, and helped him to his feet. Together, they stumbled across the finish line. That moment didn't go unnoticed. Respect in the barracks was never given freely. It was earned, moment by moment, sweat by sweat. And Emily was earning it. Still, her nights were filled with doubt. Lying in her bunk, muscles aching, she would stare at the ceiling and wonder if she was truly cut out for this. She thought about the friends back home, living simpler lives, and sometimes questioned whether she had chosen wisely. But each morning, when the whistle blew, she reminded herself that purpose wasn't found in comfort. Purpose was forged in struggle. Weapons training brought another trial. Emily had never handled a firearm before. The first time she gripped the cold steel of her rifle, her hands trembled. The crack of gunfire rattled her nerves, and her first shots missed wildly. Some laughed, whispering that she didn't belong. But Emily stayed behind after every session, practicing her aim, adjusting her stance, listening to every correction. Weeks later, when it came time for the final marksmanship test, her bullets struck the target with clean precision. Harkins, the same instructor who mocked her salute, gave a small nod. It wasn't praise, but to Emily, it was validation that, by the end of training, she was no longer the recruit who stumbled through drills and struggled under her pack. She stood straighter, moved with confidence, and carried herself with a quiet authority. She hadn't become the strongest or the fastest, but she had become unbreakable. Her transformation wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something forged in the fires of relentless testing. Emily began to see herself differently, not as the girl trying to prove she belonged, but as someone who had already proven it by enduring what so many could not. And, though she didn't yet know it, these lessons, the grit, the resilience, the refusal to quit, were preparing her for something far more dangerous than training drills. The world beyond boot camp was waiting, and her real test was still to come. Graduation from boot camp should have been Emily's chance to exhale, but the Navy never gave its recruits much time to rest. Within days, she found herself handed orders that made her pulse quicken. Deployment. Most new sailors expected to spend time stateside, adjusting to their roles and easing into the rhythm of service. Emily was different. Due to a shortage of personnel, she was being attached to a forward operating base overseas. Her official assignment was clear: communications and logistics. She wasn't expected to step into combat, wasn't expected to carry out missions, and certainly wasn't expected to fight beside the Navy SEALs she would be supporting. To Emily, it sounded like a dream. She would be part of something larger, serving where it mattered most, even if she wasn't on the front line. The flight overseas was long and uneasy. She sat among hardened sailors who spoke casually about deployments, using acronyms she barely understood. Emily tried to hide her nerves, nodding when spoken to, keeping her hands clasped tight in her lap. Outside the window, the endless stretch of ocean reminded her just how far she was from the comfort of home. When she finally arrived at the base, the desert air hit her like a furnace. The compound was nothing like the structured training grounds she had grown used to. Barbed wire lined the perimeter, watchtowers scanned the horizon, and the distant thump of helicopters was a constant reminder that this was not training, it was reality. Her first introduction to the SEAL team was humbling. They were everything the legends had promised: broad-shouldered, scarred, and calm in the way only men who had stared death in the eye could be. They carried themselves with an ease that made Emily feel small, like a child in a room full of giants. "Relax, rookie," one of them teased when she nervously fumbled a stack of radio reports. His tone wasn't cruel, but it made her cheeks flush all the same. Another smirked, adding, "The scariest thing you'll see here is a jammed comms line." Emily forced a smile, pretending their words didn't sting. She knew they didn't mean harm, but the dismissal was clear. To them, she was a background player, someone to keep the lights on, not someone to depend on when the stakes were life or death. Still, she threw herself into the work. She managed radio traffic, checked supply logs, and double-checked the functioning of equipment. Her job wasn't glamorous, but she treated every task with precision. She wanted to prove that even behind the lines, she was reliable. In quiet moments, she found herself watching the SEALs train. Their drills were brutal, their movements sharp and efficient. They practiced storming rooms, clearing corners, and communicating with silent gestures. Emily often wondered what it would feel like to move with that kind of confidence. She never imagined she would need to. Nights were both the hardest and the easiest. The base grew quiet, the desert stretching endlessly under the stars. Emily would sit by her radio equipment, headphones pressed to her ears, monitoring static and waiting for signals that rarely came. In those hours, her doubts crept in. Was she really where she belonged? Or had the Navy miscalculated by sending her here so soon? But then she would remember the oath she had taken, the long months of training, and the determination that had carried her through every obstacle. She was here for a reason. Even if others underestimated her, she would not underestimate herself. What Emily didn't know was that fate had already chosen her moment. The compound she worked in wasn't just a secure base. It was a target. Enemy fighters had been watching, waiting, and planning. The jokes about jammed radios would soon vanish, replaced by the crack of gunfire and the roar of explosions. For now, Emily continued her duties quietly, unaware that the assignment she thought was safe would soon throw her into the fire. In just days, she would learn that even those just recruits could find themselves tested like SEALs when survival was on the line. Life at the forward operating base settled into a rhythm that was both monotonous and unnerving. By day, Emily Carter worked through her assignments, logging supply manifests, relaying radio messages, and ensuring the SEAL team had everything they needed before heading out on operations. By night, she sat in the dim glow of the communications hub, listening to the soft crackle of static and occasional bursts of coded chatter. The work wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Without functioning comms, missions unraveled. Without logistics, even the strongest teams faltered. Emily told herself this truth daily, especially when the SEALs joked about her being the rookie who never left the safety of the base. She laughed along, though part of her burned with a quiet desire to prove she could be more. Still, the SEALs weren't cruel. In fact, they treated her with a kind of protective humor, like older brothers hazing the youngest sibling. During workouts, they challenged her to push harder. "Come on, Carter," one would bark with mock severity. "You call that a plank? Even the desert lizards are laughing at you." She would groan and hold the position longer, determined not to quit. Their teasing carried an odd respect, and over time, they stopped underestimating her work ethic. Evenings brought moments of calm. After dinner in the mess hall, some of the team would gather around weathered tables, trading stories of past deployments. Emily listened more than she spoke, absorbing tales of firefights, rescues, and missions that blurred the line between survival and legend. These men carried their scars lightly, telling stories not to boast, but to remember. She sat quietly, sipping her coffee, wishing she could one day carry herself with that same unshakable calm. But beneath the routine, unease simmered. Intelligence reports suggested increased activity in the region, enemy fighters moving closer, patrols spotting unfamiliar tracks near the perimeter. It was the kind of chatter Emily picked up first in the comms hub. At night, as the static filled her ears, she caught fragments of intercepted transmissions that hinted at movement. She logged the reports, passed them up the chain, and trusted the higher-ups to handle the rest. And yet, the air around the base felt heavier. The SEALs became sharper during their drills, their banter quieter, their eyes scanning the horizon with an edge Emily hadn't seen before. She felt it too, a prickling tension that made every creak of the compound gates sound louder than it should. One evening, as the desert sun bled into the horizon, Emily lingered on the roof of the communications hub. A view stretched endlessly. Sand, shadows, and a silence that seemed both beautiful and threatening. Sergeant Ortiz, one of the SEALs, joined her. He leaned on the railing, chewing gum, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "First deployment, right?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Yeah, guess it shows." Ortiz chuckled softly. "Don't sweat it. Everyone starts somewhere. You're doing fine. Just keep your head on a swivel out here. Things change fast." His tone was calm, but the warning carried weight. Emily swallowed hard, promising herself she would remember his words. The nights grew quieter, almost too quiet. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the calm was unnatural, like the held breath before a storm. In the barracks, she overheard whispers among the team rumors that enemy fighters were scouting nearby villages, probing for weak points in the base's defenses. She didn't know whether to dismiss it as paranoia or treat it as a looming threat. On her shift one night, she sat in the communications chair, headphones pressed to her ears, listening to the familiar static. Then faintly, she caught something: distorted voices, rapid, coded exchanges in a language she didn't understand. She logged the report, but her stomach nodded. There was something urgent, almost frantic, in the tone. By the time she left her post and walked back across the compound, the desert wind had picked up, scattering sand against the walls. She pulled her jacket tighter, glancing around at the shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long under the moonlight. Emily couldn't know it yet, but the stillness of that night was fragile, seconds away from shattering. The compound wasn't just a waypoint anymore, It was a target under watchful eyes. And soon, the silence would be broken by explosions. That would drag her from the safety of her desk into the chaos of survival. For now, though, the base slept under the stars, unaware that the storm was already on its way. The first explosion tore through the compound just after midnight. Emily Carter bolted upright in her bunk, heart slamming in her chest as the sirens wailed. At first, she thought it was another training drill, but the ground shook beneath her boots, dust raining down from the ceiling. This was no exercise. Gunfire erupted outside, sharp bursts that echoed off the walls. Shouts filled the air, orders, warnings, cries of confusion. Emily scrambled into her uniform and sprinted toward the communications hub, instincts guiding. Her feet, her training had drilled one thing into her. When chaos strikes, get to your station. The compound was alive with chaos. Spotlights flickered on, illuminating silhouettes of fighters climbing over the outer fence. Tracers streaked through the night sky, red and green arcs slicing across the desert. Emily ducked behind a barricade as bullets snapped overhead, her ears ringing. For the first time, she was face to face with the enemy, not in stories, not in simulations, but in the flesh. Inside the comms hub, alarms blared. Equipment rattled as another blast shook the walls. Emily rushed to her console, headset clamped over her ears, and began relaying frantic messages. Perimeter breach South Sector compromised requesting. Reinforcements. Her voice cracked, but held steady enough to cut through the chaos. Then the door burst open. 2 fighters stormed in, their weapons raised. Emily froze for half a heartbeat, fear anchoring her in place. She wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to face this. But instinct surged through her veins. Her eyes darted to the rifle mounted on the wall rack. Without thinking, she lunged for it. The weapon felt heavier than it had during training, her palms slick with sweat. One of the fighters shouted, leveling his weapon. Emily dropped low, heart pounding in her ears, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard into her shoulder, but the shot landed. The man staggered and fell. The second fighter charged. Emily fired again, the blast deafening in the small room. He collapsed beside his comrade. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by her ragged breathing. She stared at the bodies, hands trembling, trying to process what she had just done. There had been no hesitation, no time to think. Training and survival had collided, and she was still standing. The reprieve was brief. More gunfire rattled the walls, and shouts echoed outside. Emily darted to the window, spotting enemy fighters pushing deeper into the base. They moved with coordination, laying suppressive fire as they advanced. This wasn't a random attack. It was a raid, planned and deliberate. Her radio crackled. With voices. Communications hub, hold your ground. Reinforcements are moving. Emily's throat tightened. Hold her ground? She had never been trained for this. And yet, as she gripped the rifle tighter, she realized she had no choice. She wasn't just the comms operator anymore. She was the line between the enemy and the heart of the base. She barricaded the door with a desk, then crouched low behind. Every shadow outside the window looked like a threat. When another fighter tried to push through, Emily fired again, steadying her breathing, just as she had practiced on the range. Her aim wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep them back. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat soaked her uniform, her muscles ached, but adrenaline carried her forward. Each shot was a defiance, each reload a declaration that she would not yield. At one point, she caught her reflection in a cracked monitor face smudged with dirt. Eyes wide, but burning with determination. She barely recognized herself. The timid recruit was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who fought not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Outside, the battle raged. Explosions lit up the night sky, and the SEALs shouted commands as they counterattacked. Emily's role had shifted in an instant, no longer a spectator, no longer just a recruit. She was holding her ground like any one of them, caught in the storm of combat with no way back. And as the raid pressed harder against the compound walls, Emily understood that this was only the beginning. The battle outside the communications hub raged like a storm, but inside, Emily Carter forced herself to breathe steadily. Her hands trembled, her chest heaved, yet her grip on the rifle steadied with each passing second. Fear gnawed at the edges of her mind, whispering that she wasn't supposed to be here, that she was only a recruit, only a clerk. But fear had no place now, not when fighters were pressing against the walls of the base, not when every life inside depended on holding the line. Another blast shook the compound, rattling dust from the ceiling. Emily crouched low behind her makeshift barricade, heart hammering as footsteps pounded outside. She raised her weapon, sighted the door, and whispered to herself, "Just like training. Breathe. Squeeze. Don't yank." The door burst open. A figure lunged inside, weapon raised. Emily fired before thought could intervene. The man collapsed, his rifle clattering to the floor. She felt the recoil slam into her shoulder, but this time the shock didn't shake her. Instead, she moved quickly, just as her instructors had drilled. Eject the magazine, slam in a new one, tap, rack, aim. Her fingers fumbled, but muscle memory carried her through. Outside, shouts cut through the chaos. She recognized the voices of the SEALs rallying, their commands short and precise. For a moment, she felt a surge of relief. They were still in the fight, and they hadn't forgotten her. Then another realization struck. Reinforcements would take time. Until then, she had to keep the hub from falling. Bullets shredded the window. Emily ducked low, shards of glass raining around her. She crawled to the far side of the room, peeking out cautiously. Two fighters advanced through the smoke, their rifles spitting fire. Emily braced the rifle against the wall, lined up her sights, and squeezed. One fell. The other ducked behind a barricade, firing blindly. Emily adjusted her aim, waited for him to peek, and fired again. Silence followed. Her pulse raced, but a strange clarity began to settle over her. Each drill, each shouted command from training, returned in flashes. Crawl low, control your breathing, trust your stance. She wasn't perfect, far from it, but she wasn't helpless either. Every moment she resisted the urge to freeze. Every shot she took, she proved she could survive. The radio on her console crackled. Communication status? Emily grabbed the handset, her voice sharp and controlled despite her pounding heart. Still holding. Enemies repelled at entry. Requesting immediate support. Copy. Hold tight. Teen is moving to your sector. She dropped the handset, exhaling hard. Hold tight, she thought bitterly. That was all she'd been doing. But it wasn't just about waiting anymore. She was fighting. She was buying time. The next wave came harder. Explosions shook the ground as fighters hurled grenades toward the compound. Emily hit the floor as one detonated outside, the blast slamming into the wall like a giant's fist. Ears ringing, she crawled to her rifle and propped it up again. Her vision blurred, but she forced her body to move, forced her finger to squeeze the trigger. Each second stretched like an eternity. Sweat stung her eyes, her arms shook from fatigue, but she refused to falter. She thought of the recruits who had rung the bell in training, who had chosen to quit when the weight became too much. She thought of her instructors, their voices harsh but purposeful, drilling discipline into her bones. And she thought of her father's words. Courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about standing when fear screamed at you to run. Slowly, Impossibly, she realized she was doing it. She was fighting not perfectly, not with the grace of a seal, but with the grit of someone who refused to give in. She was holding her ground. When the SEALs finally burst through the smoke, their rifles blazing, Emily didn't retreat. She moved with them, shoulder to shoulder, covering their flanks as they advanced. One of them glanced at her mid-fight, eyes wide with surprise, then gave a brief nod. It was all the validation she needed. Emily Carter was no longer just a recruit. Trial by fire had forged her into something more, and the fire was far from over. Smoke hung thick in the air, carrying the acrid stench of gunpowder and burning metal. The compound was still under siege, but for the first time since the raid began, Emily Carter was no longer alone. The SEALs had stormed into the communications sector like a thunderclap, their movements precise and deliberate, every action rehearsed 1,000 times in training. And somehow, impossibly, Emily found herself moving with them. "Carter, you're with us," barked Ortiz, his voice cutting. Through the din dot, she didn't hesitate. Rifle in hand, she fell into step behind the team as they pushed out of the hub and into the open yard. The night was alive with chaos tracers slicing through the sky, the dull thud of mortar in the distance, the shouts of men fighting tooth and nail. Emily's instincts screamed at her to duck, to hide, but she forced herself to mirror the operator's movements. They advanced in a staggered line, one man covering while the other moved, their rhythm flawless. Emily mimicked them as best she could. Drop to a knee, aim, fire short bursts, then sprint to the next piece of cover. Her heart hammered, her breaths came ragged, but she kept moving. Contact left. A SEAL shouted. Two fighters emerged from the shadows, firing wildly. Emily swung her rifle, sighted the nearer one, and fired. Her shot wasn't perfect, but it forced him back into cover, buying precious seconds for the team. A SEAL dropped, the second with a clean burst. No one had time to congratulate anyone. They were already moving again, momentum their greatest weapon. Emily's world shrank to a series of rapid decisions. Aim, fire, reload, cover the flank, move when called. She had no room for hesitation, no luxury for fear. The SEALs trusted her to do her part, and for the first time, she believed she could. They reached the perimeter wall, where enemy fighters pressed hard. Flashlights bobbed in the darkness beyond the wire, shadows flitting in and out of sight. Bullets snapped overhead, punching splinters from the barricades. Ortiz pointed to a gap where two defenders were pinned down. "Carter on me!" Emily's legs moved before her mind caught up. She sprinted low, boots pounding the dirt, sliding in beside Ortiz as he laid down suppressive fire. She lifted her rifle, sighted the muzzle flashes in the dark, and squeezed off controlled bursts. One shadow crumbled, another fled back into the smoke. Ortiz gave her the quickest of nods before signaling the others forward. The fight dragged on in waves. Enemy fighters surged, were beaten back, then surged again. Emily lost all sense of time. Minutes felt like hours, hours like moments. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, her throat raw from shouting warnings and relaying positions over the radio clipped to her vest. And yet, she kept going. Each shot, each step, felt less like desperation and more like belonging. At one point, hunkered behind a sandbag wall, Emily caught her reflection in Ortiz's eyes. He gave her a look, not of pity, not of disbelief, but of recognition. She wasn't dead weight. She wasn't just the rookie anymore. She was part of the line holding this compound together. The team pressed forward again, clearing one sector at a time. Emily moved with them, her motions clumsy but effective. She wasn't polished, but she was relentless. When one operator's rifle jammed, she shifted to cover his angle without being asked. When another barked, Reloading. She instinctively laid down fire to keep the enemy pinned. These were the small, vital things that turned a recruit into a teammate. By the time the enemy began to falter, retreating into the desert shadows, Emily was running on fumes. Every muscle burned, her knees threatened to buckle, but adrenaline kept her upright. She had survived wave after wave, fought shoulder to shoulder with men she once thought untouchable. As the last gunshots faded and the compound held, Emily collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Around her, the SEALs regrouped, battered but alive. One of them clapped her on the back, grinning through the grime. "Not bad for a rookie," he said. Emily didn't smile. She simply nodded, her hands still trembling, her eyes still locked. On the horizon, the battle wasn't won by luck. It had been won by grit, discipline, and refusing to break. Tonight, she had fought like a SEAL. Dawn bled slowly over the desert horizon, turning the sky a pale gray that gave way to streaks of gold. The compound, once alive with fire and chaos, lay eerily still. Smoke curled from shattered barricades. Shell casings glimmered in the dirt like metallic confetti. The air reeked of gunpowder and scorched earth. Emily Carter stood in the aftermath, her rifle hanging limply at her side, her uniform torn and stained. Every muscle screamed, her body a patchwork of bruises, but she was still upright. Around her, the SEALs moved with weary efficiency, checking weapons, tending to the wounded, and securing the perimeter. The raid was over. The base still stood. She tried to take it in, to believe it. Hours earlier, she'd been just the recruit, a rookie tucked away in a communications hub. Now she was something else entirely, someone who had stood in the storm and refused to fall. Ortiz approached, his face streaked with grime. He gave her a long, appraising look before speaking. "Hell of a night," he said simply. Emily nodded. Words lodged in her throat. "You held your ground," he added. "A lot of people owe you for that. Don't forget it." She swallowed hard, emotions colliding inside her: relief, pride, exhaustion, grief. She had killed tonight. She had saved lives. She had proven herself in the most brutal way imaginable. And yet, the weight of it all pressed heavy on her chest. Later, she sat with the others in the mess hall. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind silence. No one boasted, no one laughed. They ate in quiet reflection, each man and woman carrying the invisible scars of the raid. When one of the SEALs finally raised his head, he looked directly at Emily. "Not a recruit anymore," he said. The others nodded, a simple gesture of respect that carried more weight than any medal. Emily lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had been pushed to the edge and discovered she could hold on. The title didn't matter. What mattered was that when it counted, she hadn't broken. After breakfast, she stepped outside. The desert stretched endlessly before her, the same horizon she had stared at nights before, wondering if she truly belonged. Now she saw it differently. The horizon was no longer a reminder of her doubt. It was a promise of what lay ahead. She thought of her parents back home, her father's words about courage, her mother's quiet tears when she enlisted. They would never fully understand what she had endured, what she had become. How could they? Even Emily struggled to put it into words. But she knew one thing. When she returned home one day, she would not be the same daughter who had left. Commanding officer later gathered the team, commending their defense of the base. "You stood fast against overwhelming odds," he said. His gaze lingered briefly on Emily, a silent acknowledgement of her role. She felt heat rise to her face, but didn't look away. That night, as she lay in her bunk, the weight of the day finally sank in. The images replayed behind her eyes, the flash of muzzle fire, the bodies crumpling, the deafening roar of explosions. She knew those memories would never leave her. But mixed with the terror was something else. Proof that she was stronger than she ever believed. Emily Carter had entered the Navy as a wide-eyed recruit, uncertain and overlooked. She had endured training that tested her resolve, an assignment meant to keep her in the background, and a raid that forced her into the crucible of combat. Through it all, she had discovered not just what it meant to serve, but what it meant. To fight, to endure, to lead. She was no longer just a recruit. She was a sailor forged in fire, carrying scars both visible and unseen, ready for whatever storms lay ahead. And as the desert night settled over the compound once more, Emily closed her eyes, not with doubt or fear, but with the quiet certainty that she belonged.